Hey everybody, it's Richard Harris and Mr. Scott. I have no faith in humanity. Lease joining us for a Surf and Sales podcast, brought to you by our good friends and sponsors on Gong, who our guest is from. Lead 411, find them, Perception Predict, and Vidyard. We appreciate those folks for supporting us and helping. Happy to help spread the word of their uniqueness and quality. So, without further ado, I want to introduce Gabrielle Blackwell from Gong, who recently just joined there in October, if I'm not mistaken, correct? So it
Uh,
is, for those listening, it's November 2020. So, you know, Gabrielle's had an even more interesting month than most of us, I think, with a new job.
yes, I just joined last month. I'm a full month and a half in now.
It's awesome. What is your role?
So I am one of the sales development managers. So I manage one of the SMB commercial teams for sales development reps.
Just for context of for people to understand where your thoughts are coming from, how big is your team? What does SMB commercial mean? Like how big is the companies you guys are selling to? Like just some context.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to say there are four segments for outbound efforts for sales development at Gong. There is SMB commercial. So this is really focusing on companies that are under 300 people, just about. After that, we have mid-market, enterprise, strategic. And then for my team, right now I have 8 people, 8 SDRs on my team, fully outbound. And at the end of the month, I believe I will have 10 people. So my team is constantly growing.
Cool. Go ahead, Scott.
What makes what makes up a good SDR team of 8 to 10 people? How do you define a good, high functioning, high performing SDR team?
Yeah. I mean, there's the first part, right? I think there's an indication of a high performing team, which is they're hitting their numbers. Everybody on the team is relatively hitting their numbers. And our team number, right, is either at or above expectations. I think that's an indicator of a high performing team or a healthy team. One of the things I believe goes into creating or cultivating an environment in which everyone can be successful and therefore the team prospers is setting up an environment where everyone has like is able to share uh equally, right? So I've managed teams in the past where we had one high performer, and typically that high performer was the one who took up the most space in terms of talk time. They're the ones who had the most opinions. They're the ones who are just the loudest in the room. And so at this point in time, it's like, where can other SGRs fit in? Can they actually engage? Are they going to have the morale there? But one of the things I'm noticing and that I'm really trying to cultivate at Gong with my team is everybody's able to share. Everybody has something to offer. Everybody's like unique skills, strengths, and qualities are seen, recognized, and appreciated. So like that to me, I think is probably one key piece of a high performing SDR team.
Go ahead, Richard.
What do you do with that one person who's taking up all the space, who's sucking up all the oxygen?
Sorry, I didn't. What was the question?
What do you do when you have that team, right? And you've got that one person who's sucking up all the oxygen. How do you like to coach that person to make space for somebody else? Let someone else have the turn.
Yeah. I mean, I have not figured this one out. I think I've had 2 teams in the past where you had that one person who really, I think unbeknownst to them, they just kind of shut everybody else up and everybody else is like sitting at the table like, all right, well, so and so is talking, like I guess I'll like, tune out and check my phone and maybe like swipe on Tinder or Bumble or something like that. So in the I think the first part is like in my one-on-ones with the other individuals on the team, like really getting a sense of like how they're feeling, like what's going on with them, like what are the things that they can share first and foremost, and then essentially just kind of like aggregating that information, potentially bringing that to like that top performing person and just letting them know like, hey, listen, your numbers show that you're knocking it out of the park right now. There's no doubt about that. And also, like, how do you see your role within a team setting? Like how do you wish to engage in a team setting and not only focusing on those number one, being the number one rep and also being kind of the loudest rep as well. And then also like, here's some information, right, that I'm getting from the team as to like what they would like to see and how they would like to engage. and how do you see yourself being a steward, right, of really creating a space in which people can realize that vision for how they wish to engage in the team. So like that to me would be like one method. I have not tried it out, right? But like, doing the research and things like that, like that's one thing that I would like to explore should I have that like one really big personality person on my team again.
Do you think this is an easier problem to solve remotely or a harder problem to solve remotely?
Ooh, good question. So, I mean, in the past teams that I've had, I feel like I've always had like one kind of like Kobe Bryant of the team, and we were always in a in-person environment. So it's only been one time where it's like, all right, you have that one person on the team in an in-person environment. We moved to remote, and one of the things that, how to put this, I think one of the things that we worked on in our one-on-ones was much more around like awareness and like emotional maturity and recognizing like how can we be perceived, how can we like, how does our presence and how we express ourselves impact others. And then I think also like in a remote setting, I can kind of like, ask other folks on a Zoom, like, hey, if I see Ben, for example, is kind of tuning out, is looking off to the side, I might kind of like prompt him to answer a question while also being sure that that number one kind of like larger personality person can kind of dial it back a little bit so the focus isn't always on them specifically.
Got it. I find it a little easier to just hit the mute button and mute Richard every time he's talking too much. So I was just wondering if that same strategy could be effective in your world.
So funny because my response to that was going to be, see, Scott, this is what I'm going to do to you now.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I've had
how much love we have for each other.
Yeah. I wouldn't say that I've had the opportunity with my team specifically, but there's other organizations I'm a part of, like Rev Genius, Revenue Collective. I'm moderating a couple channels on there. And so with that, I'll facilitate conversations in larger group settings. And there's typically going to be, if we have a group of, let's say 20, 30 people, there's going to be those two or three people who are going to take up the most space. So I kind of fell victim to letting people like almost step into the facilitator role when it was my job to. And then moving away from that, I'm like, hey, like we've heard your voices quite a bit already. Like, thank you so much. And also, like, there is a plethora of expertise and knowledge from everybody else here that we can benefit from. So I think it's in the best interest of everyone here that we start to hear from other folks, right? And then you go into like, all right, now, hey, Scott, I noticed that you've been a little quiet today, right? Like, what do you think about everything that's been said?
Do you do that publicly or do you do that privately in a separate message?
I would do it publicly, right? I think it's all in the delivery. I'm not going to be like, hey, Richard, shut your mouth. Let's hear from Scott. But it would be like, hey, like, thank you so much. Like, you are super engaged and I love it 100%. And also, like, let's see who else, right, has some ideas here just to make sure that we're capturing as many perspectives as possible.
What is the net benefit to you in moderating channels in these micro communities? I understand very clearly the benefit and value for people to be in micro communities and participate in these channels. And as somebody who is arguably facilitating in what I do with Thursday Night Sales, I'm curious what your net benefit is to moderate, these Slack channels.
Yeah. So again, I mentioned there's two channels that I'm moderating. The first one is sales management, and it's got like 800 some people. And I'll be honest, it's very like overwhelming because sales management is so generic and there could be so many flavors and so many interpretations of it. And so it really is just a matter, I think the benefit is, all right, hey, what is my lens? Like, what's the lens that I'm approaching sales management with here? Like, and why? And I feel like I get to have a point of view, right? Or assert a point of view that people can then tune into and provide feedback on. So like I as a manager or as moderator can say, all right, here are the main five things that I think any sales manager is actually going to care about. And like, here are the people who I think have something really unique and very valuable to bring to the market. Like, so let me be the connector between the two. So I think the benefit is I have this idea of like what's valuable. I know somebody who's providing a valuable insight here, and like let's bring this to folks and see like, all right, am I on the right path? Right, like are there people seeing things the same way that I'm seeing, or is there an opportunity to enlighten someone? So it's a little bit of like, I guess, pressure testing what like the way that I view the world is one way. The other channel that I'm moderating is Outbound. It's a much smaller channel. It's only about like 80, 90 people max. And for this, I mean, being in the world of sales development, especially the focus primarily for me for the past 5 years has been on outbound. Again, I feel like I'm like, there are certain points of view, certain tactics and processes that I think are incredibly important. So like, let me just bring folks in and let's have a conversation. Again, pressure tested again. But in this channel, I know more people who are doing like SDR specific things than I do like just general sales management. So it also gives me an opportunity to be like, oh, so-and-so's a thought leader. Like, hey, Morgan Ingram, like, would you be open to doing like an Ask Me Anything? And we can co-host this thing together. So there's like the fun of I get to have the conversations that I want to have with the people that I want to have those conversations with.
What do you think, digging into the micro communities, right? Aside from COVID, right? Like this stuff could have existed before, right? What do you think really propelled it other than the COVID piece? Like, was it what made you want to join micro communities? Maybe I'll just to say that.
Yeah,
And more importantly, how many are you a part of? Because if you're not careful, you could join too many.
yeah, that's a good point. So to answer the first question, I think one of the products of COVID is like, right, hey, we're at home. And I realize I'm like, okay, I'm at home. I'm not at the office. I'm not with my coworkers. I have a lot of time where it's just me and my thoughts. And in that time, I just reflected on like, where is my career right now? Like, where do I actually want to be? And am I in a place in which I can actually accomplish the goals that I set out for myself for my career? And as I was just like at home by myself, like thinking about these things, I'm like, I'm not really putting myself in a position to do what I want to do and to be where I want to be. And I thought about, okay, well, what's missing? And the first thing that I thought about was just like a network, right? I was like, the network that I have or that I had built up until, let's say, the beginning of this year, it's like, hey, it's a good one. It's coworkers. And yet, if I'm being honest, like, are they in the companies that I aspire to be in? It's like, no. So like, I need to put myself in a position where I can start to have access to people who are already doing what I would like to do. And then I also recognized like, all right, in order for me to make the next step in my career, I really do need to equip myself or expose myself to the kinds of learning opportunities and development opportunities that my company might not be able to provide to me. My former employer might not be able to provide to me. So like that to me was the motivating force of joining Revenue Collective specifically. It's like I wanted to network and I also wanted to get better at my job too. And so that's really what Revenue Collective I feel had provided to me. There's other communities that I've been a part of. Rev Genius, I'll be honest, I have not engaged all that much in terms of skill development, but I will say I feel like I've met some really amazing people, and I've actually been able to build relationships with them. So like that hits on the networking piece. Yeah, I feel like I can hardly handle two. I know I'm a part of a few others, like in terms of I tune into Slack. I might have a specific question. So for example, the sales brother and sisterhood. So it's like, I think Morgan Ingram and maybe Kevin Dorsey or Nikki Ivy started this. And it's just all sales Black professionals. And so there's certain situations that I've been in where I'm like, let me just tune into this channel and see if it let me get like a barometer here, right? So like that's really the purpose of like that channel and being in that micro community specifically. But 100% agree with you where like I can have 8 different micro community channels like in Slack and maybe I only tune into 2.
Question. How many do you think you can get, or maybe the better question is, hey, I'm going to focus on this one channel for my most level of engagement in terms of your effort and time, but you're going to join some other ones so that when you can go get a little something else or you're craving something else, you can. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yeah, definitely. I was just having a conversation with someone in Revenue Collective. It's a Black sales professional based out of London. He's in Revco, and he was like, "Hey, I saw that you're in the sales brother and sisterhood. like, what do you see as the two main differences? And like, for me, I feel like Revenue Collective, I was like, I'm focusing on skills. And so skills could be something along, that has to do a lot more with people management, business management, and kind of cross-functional alignment. So I'm like, I'm going to go there and have a conversation about like functional expertise. And that's the way that I approach it. And then for Black sales, or for sales brother and sisterhood, I kind of like, I feel like if I'm asking for advice, I appreciate the kind of cultural aspects of that channel specifically. So for example, if I was the last company that I was working at, I was one of the only Black people that were there. I think I was like one of two Black leaders in the company. And so I think I think, 2019, right? Like that was the first time they had like Black people in the company. So a lot of times when I asked my boss, who was a 50-something-year-old white dude who like, who's a conservative Republican, about like how I can approach something, it was completely off, right? Because I'm a 30-year-old Black woman from the suburbs of Chicago. So like to be able to go into a place that's, I would say, has a cultural competence that aligns to the way that I see the world and say, hey, there's this thing that happened with my coworker. I'm not really sure how to like approach this without coming off as maybe abrasive. Who else here has, who else here has maybe experienced something like this? And like, what did you do that worked and what did you do that didn't work? So like, and I felt a lot safer asking those questions in that community specifically, because I felt like, all right, these are people who are going to resonate with the experience that I'll have, being one of the only or one of the few.
Yeah, it sounds like, and I've had this conversation with a few people, is that people are finding that there's one community where they're doing their learning and their tactical and their day-to-day business stuff. And then there's another one they're a part of that's experiential, right? What is my experience?
Yep.
Right. And I think Scott, as usual, I think Scott's Thursday night sales absolutely walks the line between those two, because I've been on a couple of them, and I've seen it, well, how do you handle this sales problem? And then I'm like, how do you see this life problem? So I think that it's important. How much time, just out of curiosity, how many hours a week do you think you spend in your social channels, in your micro communities?
I mean, in Gong, not like now that I'm at Gong, not that much. In my past company, so if I joined Revenue Collective in May, right? I probably spent 50% of my time at like doing the work like that I was actually paid to do, and 50% of the time in these channels, because I got a lot more learning and development from those channels than I did from my employer. And so I was like, hey, I'm being asked to do something in work that I don't know how to do, and I don't have access to the resources within that company. I'm going to go to Revenue Collective. And I was able to like, get my anointing, come back and be able to do my job proficiently. Now at Gong, which is a very well-resourced company that has a lot of enablement, a lot of opportunities to develop and learn, and like a very much like a coaching first culture. I feel like I don't have quite the need as much as I did at the beginning of the year to be in those communities as much as I was.
Scott's messaging me like 6 times, telling me I'm sucking up all the air in this
I was
conversation.
going to say, Scott is quiet. Like, did I predict this?
I'm a quiet. I'm a quiet.
I'll shut up now for Scott. Scott, you can ask one question.
I get to ask one question. Awesome. I want to know about the SDR hotline.
Yes.
Which you haven't mentioned yet. I would love to hear you kind of break down what the work is y'all are doing there, and where you're taking it.
Thank you for asking that. I feel like I'm not very, I feel like I'm not that great at like, hey, here are all the things that I'm doing. And let me talk about it. So Brooklyn Nash from Sales Hacker, he and I had a chance to connect earlier this year. Actually, probably got connected either through Rev Genius or Revenue Collective. And I think just had a really great conversation. And when he had the opportunity to talk about this new idea that he had, which was, let's create a hotline where people can, specifically SDRs, can ask questions such as, like, what can I do? How can I almost like manage or cope with a difficult boss, right? How can I ask for more money? Like those kind of questions. So for the first 2 episodes, like that was really the focus. People are going to submit questions anonymously, and then I'll go up there on my soapbox by myself and like answer these questions. After the second episode of doing that, of like not really having any, I felt like real engagement, and also reflecting on, I'm like, you know what, these are to me surface level questions. And there's got to be a much deeper conversation that we can have that can be a lot more meaningful. Because the vision that I was kind of in service to and initially brainstorming with Brooklyn as to what this SDR hotline could be is there has to be a source where SDRs can feel empowered and advocated for, and that they can also, um, come away encouraged and feeling as though they can advocate for themselves safely and they have a model of how to do that. So so after the second episode, I think I connected with Ashley Zacks from Chili Piper, and she just talked about her experience of like being a queer Latina in sales. And it was just a point of view that I had not yet been exposed to, like directly one-on-one. It was always very theoretical. And I thought to myself, I'm like, all right, here's an SDR who's talking about her experience, and it's some real shit. So like, this is the stuff that I'm like, I felt enlightened after coming away from that conversation. I'm like, these are the conversations that I really want to have, is like, how are people given, who they are, however they are, where they're from, all of that, like how they're approaching or what's informing who they are today. Like, those are the stories that I would love to amplify, because as an SDR manager myself, like, one of the biggest things that I hear from folks is like, all right, I'm not good enough. I don't have enough experience. Like, I don't know what I don't know. And I'm like, this could, there's so many people who are experiencing these things. Like, let's bring folks to the table who are finding a way to overcome that and essentially provide a different model for how to approach the SDR role, and recognizing like we as a whole person can show up as a whole person and be successful, right? But here are the ways that we can do that.
It sounds like you're almost saying that you enjoy the stories and the people more than any kind of tactical takeaway.
Well, there's so many people doing tactical takeaways.
Yes.
There's so many. I'm like I was talking
I'm pointing this out because other than being like old as hell and not wanting to deal with this anymore, like I don't want to hear your sales tactical takeaway anymore. Like I'm like not that interested in it. I'm very interested in human stories of success and survival and pain, and as it pertains to business and selling and management and that kind of thing.
I had my last episode of SDR Hotline last week, and in prior to like going live with Ashley, I was talking to Brooklyn, and Brooklyn's like, hey, I recognize you want to tell a story, and also like, is there a way, he's like, here's a question, like, is there a way to also introduce some tactics? And as I was talking to Ashley live, like, we were talking about how to advocate for yourself, given, however and whoever you are. So I was like, hey, listen, if you're not able to advocate for yourself, there's always going to be the risk that you're not getting what you need to be successful, right? So if you're not being successful in the SDR role and you're not advocating for yourself, right? Like what if you had just told your boss, hey, I learned differently. Here's what has worked for me in the past. Do you think, you and I can partner together on a way to help me out given the way that I am? So like, if you're not doing this and you're not being successful and you're chalking it up to, hey, there's something wrong with me. It's like, no, like, what if it was just a matter of you didn't speak up for yourself and maybe you just didn't know that you could? So like at that point in time, like as Ashley and I were having this conversation, I was like, shit, like what I'm like, advocacy is a skill that can help you be that much better in your role. Like, this is 100% a tactic.
I learned how to be my own advocate when I was in the hospital, because when I'm in the hospital and struggling and suffering, you start to realize that unless you kind of make a pest of yourself, you don't get checked on as often by the nurses or the doctors. The medicine comes late. That thing you asked for, they forgot about because they're, moving around trying to help hundreds of other different patients and whatnot. And initially when I'm in there, I remember thinking, I don't want to bother, Gabrielle again. I already asked her for this thing. Like, she'll get it to me when she gets to me. But then you start to realize like, no, I'm fucking suffering here in the meantime. And ain't nobody here to help me out. I'm here all by myself. And my job is not to worry about all these other people's feelings. My job is to survive.
Yeah.
And my job is to try to, survive and get healthy and thrive as fast as possible. So you just learn how to be your own advocate, and going through that at a relatively early age. By the time I got into the workforce, like that's just who I am now.
Yeah. I mean, you brought something up super, like, 'cause I learned how to advocate for myself in the hospital too. I had a pretty severe, like, nervous breakdown after like having worked in a very hostile work environment. And when I got to the hospital, the doctors didn't have that context that I was like in this incredibly stressful environment, and they were just like, oh hey, like here's this person who just has a bipolar disorder. And so I remember like being in the hospital. My mom came to visit me. My mom had struggled with her own mental health issues, so I had some awareness of like how to navigate these conversations and what to look for. And I remember my mom was talking to me, just like kind of just thinking out loud, and she's like, you have to think about, like, you have to think about your health, you have to think about your diet, you have to think about how much you're sleeping, you have to think about the environment in which you're in. Like nothing's going to be solved with a pill alone. And I had seen that firsthand, seeing my mom struggle, like growing up, and someone just handing her a pill, and that pill actually made things worse. And like here I was 14 years old trying to figure things out for my mom. So when I was in the hospital, I remember I remember talking to the doctor who's on staff, and the doctor was like, all right, we're going to prescribe you lithium, and lithium is going to like magically cure all your problems. And I was like, okay, doc, I hear you, but what else do I need to do here? And that's like the first time that I really spoke up for myself, like having been in that situation. And I'm like, I grew up watching my mom struggle, and she had lithium. So you can't tell me that this is the end all be all here. So like, unless you can help me understand what I need to eat, how often I need to work out, what workouts I actually need to do, how much I need to sleep, which work environments I can and cannot be in. Like, I hear you think this pill is going to be great, but I don't, like, this is not going to be the end all be all for me. So at that point in time, like, I remember looking over and there's a couple of residents there, and the one girl was like clapping. She's like, look at you advocating for yourself. I'm like, wow, that felt good. Because at that point in time, and things shifted. It's like, I think the doctor recognized, I'm like, all right, hey, like, maybe we don't know everything like here with this person. And I mean, that was shortly after.
It's so transferable though, because you go to a new role, a lot of times people just accept the training or the content that they're being given or is being shared with them. And if you need more or need something different and don't speak up, you're going to get left behind.
Yes. I think, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, and even when you're tenured, if you will, in a role, right? Like, let's say look, I was the senior vice president of sales, and I remember arguing for weeks on end, advocating for myself that I needed this particular tool or this particular staff underneath me to help me with this thing. So it's very transferable. And I hope one of the main takeaways of this episode, honestly, is that you have to be your own self-advocate, because help is not coming. And I know Richard made fun of me at the beginning of the episode saying I have no faith in humanity, but like, I have more faith in me than I do in everyone else.
No, Scott, that's real.
I mean, look, first of all, that's the title of the episode. The greatest skill you can have is how to be your own self-advocate. So I picked that up on this, but
yes.
My mom always said to me, and I misinterpreted it at the young age, but she always said, look, nobody's going to look out for you better than you. Right. And she meant it from a work perspective, and probably took it into personal life, which caused whole other issues. And that it's okay to be a little bit selfish sometimes. Like, there's nothing wrong with that as long as you're not hurting somebody else, right?
Yeah.
So those are two pieces of advice that I probably should have listened to my mother, but of course I'm Gen X, so God forbid I do that. If it had come from Scott's mom, I probably would have listened.
Oh my gosh. Even if I think about like the reps that I've managed who perform the best, these are like, I have, I'm gonna give a shout out to my girl, Lana O'Leary. She's amazing. I love her. She hits me up all the time. And she's like, she's like, I don't want to bug you. I'm like, you're not. you're really not, because like for me, if you're running into challenges, I would rather know that, because if there's a way to like resolve them, get them out of the way, and
Yeah.
open up the door to more opportunities, that's a win for everybody. Everybody.
It's
So
interesting.
like
It's
even if
interesting.
advocating for yourself, like you're gonna help your manager or help like your boss, assuming they're receptive to it, like you're gonna help them out as well.
It's interesting the phrasing, because I used to say to my team, your job is to bug the shit out of me. I tell that to my clients now, even, Richard. I'm like, you're going to get out of me whatever you ask of me. If you don't pester me, then I'm going to assume that everything's fine. Or I'm going to assume that you don't care. If you pester me and advocate for yourself and bug me and ask for this, that, and the other, I'm going to assume that you need the help. And I'm going to be proud of you and stoked that you're asking for the help and you're going in and going to get it, you know? So.
Gabrielle, how long ago was that incident in your life where you had to self-advocate?
Almost 3 years ago. So
Three.
yeah, January 26th is my anniversary.
So, and the reason I ask is, do you remember what it was like for you, experiential, before you got to that in life? Like, so that if people may be feeling like, not to say people are having breakdowns, like that's not where I
Yeah,
want to go. Where
yeah.
I want to go is like, hey, if I knew then what I know now, right?
Hmm.
Like, what were you experiencing before you finally sort of, took that leap?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the feelings that I had, like
Yeah.
way I was expressed, like just the expressions. For me, like, I mean, I was that person who like, woke up in the morning, and as I was getting ready, I was bawling my eyes out. Like like bawling my eyes out while I was getting ready, and then I'd somehow managed to get it all together before I walked to work. I lost my appetite. I was breaking out everywhere, like all on my back. There's like all these like physical like manifestations of like you're not in a healthy place right now. So whether it was like not being able to sleep, whether it was self-medicating, if it was just like being hysterical all the time. I remember having a panic attack at home, and having to call my mom. And I had to get into like child's pose to finally calm myself down. Like my stomach was always in knots. Like those were all the things that were happening.
But were you having those for months on end, or was that sort of like,
Yeah,
okay,
months
that's
on
when I knew I needed to do something?
I think the first time that I like had this, like where, like I will say I'm a very sensitive person, but I'm not usually one to express that just like out and about. And normally I feel somewhat, I shouldn't say in control, but like in a flow and in rhythm. And so there was these times where like something would happen and I would start talking about it, and it's like I just completely unraveled. So maybe the first time that happened was like I'm gonna be giving away my company, but was like in April of a specific year, right? And I had my episode in January. So like this, like it had been happening for a while, and I was in this company. I had only been there for maybe 5-6 months. I already had a track record of only being at a company for at most a year. Not my fault though. And so like the advice that I got was like, hey, try and stick it out for a year. And I had a breakdown like a month after my 1 year mark.
But go back even further than that, right? So somewhere you still were growing up, 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, 5 years ago. Is there a difference in the way you were conducting yourself then versus now?
Yeah.
Like,
I
what
mean,
are those things that you've recognized have been like, oh, now that I know this, back then, if I'd have known this, that I would have known to do something then.
yeah, I think I mean, I was not better 5 years ago. Like that's probably, I mean, I think it was just like a downhill spiral because I
Right.
didn't have the coping mechanisms. I didn't have self-awareness. I think that's the biggest thing. I had a habit of ignoring myself and neglecting myself and dismissing the
What
feelings
were
that
you
I
ignoring? Like, what kind of things were you ignoring?
so I I've gotten a lot more into just like being aware of like what's going on in my body and like listening to the language of my body, right? So I'll give you an analogy. So I have plants all over the place. If I have a plant and a baby leaf shows up, grows out, and the leaf is yellow, even though it's a vibrant green plant, this typically means to me, I was like, all right, hey, like this is a pot bound or a root bound plant. I either need to like, massage out the roots, or I need to find a new pot. And that's how the plant is going to talk to me to let me know if there's something that's wrong here with their environment. So with like, for me, specifically, it might be a matter of like racing thoughts or like constant worry, or, kind of just talking about things on end and not being able to stop. That's like one expression of that. I think the like, the knots in my stomach is another one, like another expression of that, or like feeling as though I can't actually take a deep inhale in and exhale fully. I mean, and there's also like the more obvious ones of, like, I was the person who cried at work. I'd go go into like a closet, like into like a back room or something, and just be crying. And I'm like, I don't know why or what's happening here. And yeah, so I mean, I think those were probably like the main ones, right? Where I think, walking, how I was in the morning, what I was feeling was incredibly sad and just like down and out. And then coming into work and feeling as though I had to put on a mask, right? So like, I think even just that duality, like having to be split into two different people, that's probably the first indication that like, hey, this is not going to be sustainable.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was curious if those were the things I was looking for, because if someone else is going through that, I want them to understand that, hey, you're normal. Everybody has this.
Mm.
And there is this, beautiful piece on the other side if you can start to self-advocate. And I think you're a great example of that. So thank you
Yeah.
for being vulnerable on that and sharing that. I think it's super important.
Yeah, get a therapist, a good one. I don't know. Somebody who could just check, because honestly, like the structures that we grew up with might be the same structures that like tear us down as adults. So like without that awareness and like the understanding that we're gonna have to rebuild ourselves over and over again, we're gonna play out these tired stories over and over and over again and lose out way more than we actually should.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Scott, I thought you were going to say something.
No, I was waiting, just sitting here patiently, Richard.
Okay, Scott.
One last question before we wrap up, Gabrielle. How the heck does a woman with some sort of French language certification and a public policy degree end up in the SDR world?
Oh, that's a good question. I'll say because the big companies didn't want me.
Big company didn't want you to do what?
Okay, there's a whole story. Well, one, I went to University of Chicago. I got a public policy degree because I think I was just like, I wanted to study psychology. I thought I was going to be a therapist. And right before I'd started, my uncle's like, psychologists don't make any money. Like, don't do that. And so me and my 17-year-old self was like, I guess I gotta suit my family's wishes. So I became a public policy major. I thought it was incredible.
Because wait, public policy people make more money than psychologists?
No, they don't.
If you're not watching this episode, Gabrielle just shook her head back and forth violently in disgust. That's part of. I'm just trying to follow the logic, and clearly there's no logic.
Obviously, it was not. It was not logical.
Yeah. Okay.
But no, I did this major that I really didn't want to do. It's probably the best. I didn't stand up for myself was the biggest thing there. I was burnt out by the time I graduated. I moved to France. Would live there for 2 years, learn the language, everything. And by the time I come back, I was like, you know what? Like, the people that I went to school with, we did the same path in academia world, and they're doing consulting and stuff like that for these big 4 consulting firms. So I thought I was going to go down that path when I came back, and they were like, so you've been graduated for too long to be eligible for the programs for recent grads, and you don't have any experience, so you don't qualify for an experienced hire. So I didn't get any headway, anywhere that I wanted to go to.
So that whole mathematical equation is basically how most people end up in sales.
Yeah.
all of the stuff that we thought we were doing that made sense, or somebody else wanted us to do, just didn't really work out the right way. So thank God.
yeah, then I think, but there was the stepping back away from, like, I think it's like that moment of reflection. Like, all right, hey, like, where do I actually want to go? Like, I think if we just focus on a job as like I just need to get a paycheck, you're likely just gonna like hop from one company to the next and like not really know like why you're doing what you're doing. And so at least that's the case for me. And so I just took a step back and I'm like, okay, let me just think about the long term. What do I actually want to do? Where do I want to be? Like what's the vision, right? That I'm going to be in service to now. And I just like, I was like, you know what? I'm going to be CEO, right? Like my grandfather was a CEO of his company. Like I come from a line of entrepreneurs. So I'm like, yeah, CEO seems great. Like, yes, let's do that. And I just researched like where are CEOs starting their careers often. And like the two places that I kind of like whittled it down to were sales and finance. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to sit in front of a spreadsheet all day, even though I do now as a manager, for the most part, right? Like it's
The joke's on you.
right, like yeah. This is one big old cosmic joke that the gods have put me through. And yeah, and so I was like, but I can talk to people. Like I was like, so that I remember I remember looking at, I can recall it, staring at the screen, like looking at the job description. It's like cold call, cold email, and I was like, where has my life brought me to? But then yeah, if I applied on a Wednesday, I started the job the following Wednesday, and like the rest is history.
That's awesome. How can we?
Scott, that's Scott's way of telling you that you fulfilled his belief system that everyone's a sales degenerate.
That's right.
That's it.
That's why we're here. No, first of all, we start
Yes.
off as degenerates, and then we graduate to sales degenerate.
I was gonna say, I'm like, I feel like the people who are like probably the most composed,
We're building
the
this right
like the
now.
people who are the least degenerates, I'm like, are you gonna make it in sales?
Yes. See?
Scott, I'm designing your new T-shirt right there, buddy.
Oh my gosh.
Oh my
I
God.
would like one, please.
So if we don't tell anybody what it is, everybody needs to go watch the YouTube episode to see what it is.
Let's do
So,
it.
Well, we've gotta wrap. We want to say thanks once again to Gong.io, Vidyard, Perception Predict, Find Them, and Lead 411, who are our sponsors here for the month of November. Did I get everybody, Richard?
Yeah, you got them right. Well done.
How can we help and support you, Gabrielle? Is there anything we can answer for you? Anything we can do for you?
I think one of the things that's happening right now is like, well, besides COVID, being at home, elections, society, like, just unrest, what are the ways in which you're taking care of yourself right now? That's the question.
You want to go first, Richard, or do you want me to go first?
No, I can go first. That's pretty easy. So I'm a big advocate of meditation, a big advocate of therapy. I'm a big advocate of Western medication, if that's up your alley for mental health. My problems are like yours, Gabrielle. They run much deeper than just sort of the current stress level. I get up and walk every day. I actually get up and walk every day, and I either do it as either a full 25 or 30-minute walk. Sometimes it's just what I call the 6-minute walk. I walk out the door, go in a direction for 3 minutes, and come back in 3 minutes. And it's just to get my body moving a little bit. Like there's no other goal than to just make me stop what I'm doing. I learned this one from Galen around doing the walk and talk, like stop making everything a Zoom meeting. If I don't have to take notes, I'm not going to be on Zoom. I'm just going to dial in. So I'm a big advocate of that. I've actually gotten a personal trainer and I'm eating better, spending time with the kids. I think we've done all those, those are the things that I do specifically. I actually have built out the last thing I build out time. So literally every Wednesday from 2:30 to 5:30, Tuesday or Wednesdays and Fridays, my calendar's blocked to go play golf. I don't go play. I probably go every other week at least once, but that's a whole lot more than I used to. But even then I have that time booked out I can set another meeting if I want to, and I'm in control of my calendar, or I can spend time doing something else around the house that needs to get done. So I've sort of built in some of that downtime. So those are my answers.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't even know what I would add to that other than naps. This is one of the benefits, I think, of working from home and working for myself in the last 13 months or so. Like you, I know how to pay attention to my body. And I've had a long relationship with physical health problems, not mental health problems, but physical health problems. So when my body is done, then I'm done for the day or for the night or whatever. So I often have found myself with an hour here or 2 hours there, and I just go back to bed, to be honest with you. You know, I'm siesta. I'm on the siesta train right now, Gabrielle. That's
I
what's
will jump in.
not
I'm going to
working.
jump in and say this about Scott, though. He didn't used to do that. Even if his
No,
body said no, he wouldn't. So I will come back and say, Scott, I think you've mentally adjusted that, hey, wait a minute. I do need to listen to my body, because when I don't, not only do you physically ail, but even then your mental game gets, dull. I know
yeah.
you.
Well,
And so I think,
this is one of the things I'm trying to say is working in my advantage in particular, given the circumstances that we're in, where, it's a little spooky and scary for somebody like me to go out in public and, be around lots of people, and God knows how many people you want to be around anyways right now with everything that's been going on in the world. So like as a almost year-long time to be at home, learning how to pay attention to my body and resting more, even if it's the middle of the day, that is helping me cope, if you will.
I love it.
I would agree.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, because I'm asking my reps. I'm like, how are you taking care of yourself right now? And people
So
are like,
your reps are going to be like, well, I heard Scott say nap on the.
hey, honestly, one of my reps, like, I was like, hey, are you coming to this meeting? And she's like, sorry, I was taking a nap.
All for it.
I don't know how to feel about this, but you're hitting your number, so you're good.
That's the correct answer. The correct answer is, hey, good job. You got to do what helps you.
I will throw this out there that I hear from constant friends. I don't really go to Scott's Thursday night sales thing that often, but I hear from people constantly that it is one of their greatest things they do for themselves, not even career-wise, just emotionally. And I think, to your point, Gabrielle, finding that community, finding that place to share, finding that place, that's a big, important piece right now. And Scott's is different than other places. And I don't know if people, I'm just a big fan of how
So what
Scott
you're
does.
saying is Amy and I are like 200 people's therapist every week, is what
You're
you're
Pretty
like
much.
the Oprahs of the sales world
Yeah,
right now.
but then they also they all
Oprah
dress
and
up for
Dr. Phil,
Halloween.
basically.
And if people want to booze it up during that therapy session, they can booze it up, right? Like they don't care. Like it's that chill. So
Well,
awesome.
thanks for that. And thank you, Gabrielle, for spending some time with us, and stay in touch. I really enjoyed the conversation.
I really did too. Thank you both for having me.
Yeah, it's our pleasure. Bye.